our teammate Michael couldn't make it today, so I'll be taking over his portion. And we're doing ours on corporate governance. So basically we want to start off with why corporate governance is even important to GTC. I mean, like, it sounds like a lower division business class. Why do we need to know about it? Well, it's actually very important. So the main problem we have with corporate governance is something called the agency problem, which is when managers who are hired as the agents of the company by like the board of directors and the shareholders may actually like pursue their own interests, like by the further expense of the shareholders, causing like conflicts of interest for the company between the managers and the real owners of the companies. And the managers are like the CEOs and high-ranking officials. So basically, we're going to be talking about the solutions to solving this problem, and once we have the solutions, what it could mean for profit for GTC. So basically, if we can, once we go over the solutions of what we're going to do, through this, GTC can basically create like corporate governance evaluations as like means of underwriting, investment banking. We can basically create models and indexes to measure the level of corporate governance within individual stock exchanges, companies, countries, and use that to build models and forecast basically stock prices. So that would allow us to either short, let's say it's the index is showing out low, and our model tells us that that may mean the stock prices are going down. That means we can short the stock, or if like, per se, the stock prices our forecast model says the stock prices are going up because of high corporate governance. That means we can either buy long or just hold the stock or various other methods. So and then we can also consult firms through our investment banking division, and by using corporate governance, basically generating additional revenue through the fees that we'll charge through the consulting fees. And so basically we project that through these methods, once we create our indexes and set everything up in place, we actually have a $50 to $75 million in estimated profits through consulting fees and trading over the next 12 to 24 months. So basically, to start off, governance of the public corporation. So basically the key goal of financial management, or what it should be, is shareholder wealth maximization. However, in reality, that's not always the case. There's no guarantee, basically, the managers, the CEOs of the company would run the company to maximize the wealth of the shareholders. So an important definition in corporate governance is basically the economic, legal, and institutional framework in which corporate control and cash flows are distributed among shareholders and then and other stakeholders of the company. And then this is usually in public corporations where it's owned by a multitude of shareholders. And so some of the key, key issue highlighted as a conflict of interest between managers and shareholders. Basically how this works is, over here you can see shareholders hire the board of directors who hire managers to run the company. Managers are supposed to be the agents working for shareholders, the real owners of the company. However, often we'll find that there is management-friendly insiders that dominate the board of directors. So these are members of the board of directors who are friends of the management. And basically, we'll find that often they'll hire like managers will get hired because they're friends of the board of directors, which can present a problem, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then also with diffused ownership, which is when there are a great number of shareholders that split the company, basically. There's no consolidated shareholders. With diffused ownership, few shareholders have strong incentives to incur costs of monitoring management. Basically, this is due to the principle that the benefits from the company are shared. Like if the company goes well, the benefits are shared, but among all shareholders. But if one shareholder had to incur, or like a group of shareholders had to incur the costs, that wouldn't be split apart among the shareholders. The cost of monitoring the actual CEOs and seeing how they're doing. So basically, this comes back to the agency problem. We already explained that managers who are hired as agents working for shareholders may actually pursue their own interests, contrary to the company, create conflicts. So yeah, again, problems like for firms with diffuse share ownership. So what happens is managers often end up with residual control rights to company decisions because there's too many shareholders and their shares are too spread out that they don't feel like they really feel the need to be too involved within the company. So they just leave it to the CEO managers, which would make sense. However, these managers can use these residual control rights to abuse the company through exorbitant perquisites, which is like, for example, a CEO using a company jet for $90 million to like fly him to his private island or fly him to his vacations. Also, transfer pricing to managers' companies. This happens when, like, let's say I'm a CEO of a company, but I own another company that would like benefit from my company's output. So like, let's say I own a eraser company, but I'm the CEO of a pencil manufacturing company. I would buy my eraser company's erasers at huge like margins, like way above the market price, costing the pencil company, which I'm CEO money, but earning myself money through my own company of erasers. So that's like an example of that. Also, we get the problem of managerial entrenchment, where eventually we get so many residual control rights, and the board, and I'm friends with many people on the board of directors, if I'm a CEO, that I can just entrench myself within the company and not be removed. It's very hard for me. And then retaining cash flows for personal gains. That often involves making my company bigger, though sometimes at the expense of the stakeholders. Basically personal reputation. Often CEOs are judged on the retainment of cash flows or the growth of their company, not so much as maximizing profits for the shareholders. And so here are some remedies for this agency problem that have been looked into and seen. So basically, you have independent board of directors, which is a board of directors that remain independent of like management. Like they don't know the CEO, they're not friends with the CEO. These are guys who are only interested in one thing, which is like making sure the shareholders and the company are successful. So they'll make sure that they're not really putting in any insiders or any of their friends in management. Also, incentive contracts. This is offering various incentives to tie the success of the company to the manager. This is important because if a manager doesn't really care about his company but only his profits, then he can like kind of just do whatever, kind of mess around with the company, use it for his own profit. But if his bonuses or profits or incentives are tied directly within the company, he has a stake in the company. He's more likely to see it succeed, to see the stakeholders, of which he is a bigger part of now, succeed. And another remedy is concentrated ownership. This is basically, you see this a lot in actually companies with what we would consider to have poor corporate governance laws for compensation. This is when a bunch of shareholders get together and concentrate their percent owned of the company. So you have like maybe like 3 groups of investors owning like 60% of the company. That way they have a lot more like control over the company. So you can use that to make sure the manager doesn't like go off on his own versus like you have 100 people each with 1% of the company. I mean, that's so split off that you can't really consolidate that power to do something about management. Accounting transparency, requiring the release of more accurate accounting. This has been seen in recent years through different laws that have been placed, which we'll be going over later on the slide. But we're now requiring more and more accounting transparency to make sure that the CEOs of the company aren't like purposely fudging with the account records. Debt is a big one. Can force managers to basically disgorge free cash flows to investors through the pressures of debt. However, that can be dangerous once you get into too much debt and you're not like a company with a lot of maybe cash flows or things that you can offset the debt with. It can be a problem forcing the company to bankruptcy. So you just gotta be careful with that one. Overseas stock listings. Basically, you list stocks on exchanges where there are more protections for the shareholders. Like we were talking about earlier, different stock exchanges have different laws, different protections for the shareholders. So like maybe the Hong Kong or maybe the Chinese stock exchange has less protections than the New York Stock Exchange. So what a company would want to do is they want to list their stock on the New York Stock Exchange, providing more legal protection for the shareholders. And finally, market for corporate control. This is kind of like a last ditch effort. This is you're basically inviting hostile takeover bids from other companies or other groups if the managers waste funds and hurt the shareholders. Because the odds are if you have hostile takeovers, you'll keep many of the same shareholders, or you'll either keep the shareholders or buy them out for great profit. And then once a new company takes over, usually what they'll do is they'll implement their own new either CEO or new way of controlling the company. And odds are they'll get rid of any CEO entrenchment, managerial entrenchment, causing the agency problem. So we go into basically a lot of corporate governance. We already defined it. It's basically the economic legal institutional framework in which cash flow rights and corporate control are distributed. The purpose of it is to protect shareholder rights, curb managerial excess, and restore confidence in capital markets. And again, our central issue: how to best protect outside investors from expropriation by managers and controlling insiders, so that investors. And so there's legal protection of investor rights systematically. The legal protection of investor rights systematically varies from country to country, index to index to index, depending on the historical origin of the nation's legal system. English common law countries tend to provide a stronger protection, whereas French civil law countries tend to be the weakest, tend to be very laissez-faire. So the French civil law, based on the comprehensive codification of legal rules. Sometimes it's easily to kind of misinterpret these rules, or kind of work around them. Whereas common law, it's based on actual and discrete rulings by independent judges on disputes and judicial precedents. So there's basically you have independent judges actually deciding. So there's a lot more personal control over these laws, and it's basically evolved to be more protective of property rights, and then that extends to the investors. And so here we have kind of an example. Does it really matter? I mean, what's this? And we look at Italy versus the UK. So we see that Italy's legal origins are French civil law, which we talked about earlier. It's more laissez-faire, whereas the UK is the English common law. And so basically we look at shareholders' rights, and based on the index we would possibly develop, and through numbers that our team has worked together to find, we found that the shareholder rights are actually very low. There's not a lot of protection for them in Italy, whereas in England they're extremely high. You have the Cadbury Code, various other implementations. We will be talking about Cadbury Code later. And then you can see right here, consolidation. We talked about how companies will try and consolidate, or shareholders will consolidate to try and stop managers from abusing the rights. You can see ownership by the three largest shareholders, 58% in Italy versus in UK it's only 19%. And so you can again look at the market cap, 71%/GDP, and then in UK 248%. And finally, the listed stocks on Italy's index or stock exchange, 247 versus 2,292. So you can see that again, most companies would want to be listed under places with shareholder rights, where the protections are high. So yeah, that's fine. And so basically, consequences of law is protecting the rights of investors have major economic consequences in terms of corporate ownership patterns, the development of capital markets, economic growth, and more. Poor investor protection results in again what we were talking about. We were looking at concentrated ownership, excessive private benefits of control, underdeveloped capital markets, and slower economic growth. And basically, outside the United States and the United Kingdom, large shareholders, often outside founding families, extract substantial private benefits. This is especially seen in places like Japan, where the family, there's often founding families that have huge shares. They basically do what's in their interest, what's best for their interest.
Okay, so corporate governance reform. Failure to reform corporate governance will damage a number of things. It will damage investor confidence, stunt development of capital markets, raise cost of capital, distort capital allocation, and shape confidence in capitalism. Two governance systems that gained recognition for their success were in Japan. In the 1980s, they had a bank-centered governance system. This system guided corporate managers to pursue long-term performance goals, and also banks and large shareholders supported companies in times of financial distress. And then in the 1990s, the U.S. economy and stock markets surged, and their market-centered governance system gained reputation. This system induced short-term oriented corporate decisions. There's been a growing consensus that corporate governance reform should be a matter of global concern, and this is because governance mechanisms have failed to effectively protect outside investors. So the chapter suggests a simple answer to the objective of reform, and it states, strengthen the protection of outside investors from expropriation by managers and controlling insiders. A reform requires three things. One, strengthening the independence of boards of directors with more insiders. Two, enhancing the transparency and disclosure standard of financial statements. And three, energizing the regulatory and monitoring functions of the SEC and stock exchanges. So politics make it difficult for governance reform because existing governance systems have been built from the historical development of the country's economic, legal, and political infrastructure. And also many parties have invested interest in the current system, and they will try to resist change. In order to be successful, reformers must take into account political dynamics that are surrounding governance issues. They should seek help from media, public opinion, and NGO, non-governmental organizations. So the Sarbanes-Oxley Act passed July 2002 following a public uproar from the U.S. corporate scandals. The key objective of it was to protect investors by improving the accuracy and reliability of corporate disclosure. The major components of the acts were accounting regulation, which is the creation of a public accounting oversight board charged with overseeing the auditors of public companies and restricting the consulting services that auditors can provide to clients. And an audit committee should consist of independent financial experts. Internal control assessments. Public companies and auditors should test the effectiveness of financial record keeping and fraud prevention. And then executive responsibility, the chief executive and finance officers must sign off on quarterly and annual financial statements. So the Dodd-Frank Act passed July 2010 following the financial crisis of 2008. And the Act represents the most comprehensive uphaul of the rules of finance since the Great Depression. The Act had major impacts on the ways decisions are made in financial firms. And the key features of this Act include the Volcker Rule, which is deposit-taking banks will be banned from proprietary trading and from owning more than a small fraction of hedge funds and private equity firms. The resolution authority, governments can seize and dismantle a large bank in an orderly manner if the bank faces impending failure and poses a systematic risk to the broader financial system. Derivative securities, derivative trading in over-the-counter markets will be transferred to electronic exchanges. The systematic risk regulation, Financial Stability Oversight Council will monitor activities and financial conditions of important financial firms. And consumer protection, new independent consumer financial protection bureau will monitor predatory mortgage loans and other loan products.
Basically, this was kind of like in response to like the whole like predatory loans, like subprime loans that happened when during the whole global recession during 2008 and a little bit previously, back when the companies were basically preying on people with crazy like interest rates and loans with very bad interest rates.
And then corporate governance reforms strengthen shareholders' cash flow rights, and they also enhance corporate performance.
Yeah, and then a quick addition for there's also something called the Cadbury Code, I believe, Cadbury Code of Ethics or something. And the Cadbury Code basically states it's actually a UK provision, kind of similar to the Dodd-Frank Act and the Oxley-Savona's Act, or sorry for mispronunciation. But anyway, basically it actually works a little bit differently though. In the this is a UK code that is basically, it's up to the discretion of the London Stock Exchange companies whether they want to follow it or not. But the big thing about that code is that they have to publicly explain, they have to publicly list whether they are following the code or not, and then explain why they aren't, if they aren't. And this basically has like a sense of compliance, because what company is gonna like not follow that code unless they have something to hide, or unless they're like kind of sketchy for investors to invest in. And so can you bring us back to the second slide? So basically to review, in all these, all this has very important correlation with GTC involvement and how we can create more profits through the reasons originally listed. Basically, if we can make sure that we can create an index, a measurement models, and forecast models to really involve ourselves with corporate governance and see how the companies which follow it highly or have very low corporate governance, if we can incorporate a model that would earn us a lot of profits through consulting fees, trading,